So here we are on another rather cold grey English morning, the best of English winter weather, you could even say. Not very prepossessing, but we're looking this week at number 3 in our series on prophecy and questions of allusions, images and symbols. This one is images of marriage, and it's true that throughout scripture God uses the marriage relationship as a symbol of the relationship between himself and his people, between himself and you and me. We are the bride of Christ. We are the people of God who are basically married to him. And unfortunately, the problem is, of course, that all too often that doesn't work out as you would want it to. And God is left with images which are on the other side of marriage, of divorce, of a broken relationship. I'm thinking particularly prophetically of Hosea, you know, the prophet Hosea, who was told to go and marry a prostitute, Gomer, and she runs off, and Hosea has to go and take her back, because that's what God does with us. Even though we go our own way, even though we're unfaithful to him. All throughout the Old Testament you see God's complaint about his people being unfaithful to him, in terms of it was a wife being unfaithful to her husband. And as we look through these various texts there in Genesis, Ephesians, Ezekiel, Revelation, we can see that God is pleading, imploring, and using, even in this prophetic material, the idea of wanting that very close relationship with each other. There's a long quote from Timothy Keller. I won't go into it exactly here, I won't read it out, but it's talking about how God brought Eve to Adam in the beginning, how he brought husband and wife together, and God officiated in that marriage ceremony. So there's a good beginning to think about it. As I said in our last study, we don't often think of Genesis as being a prophetic book, but the background of Genesis is vital to understand how the prophetic works then follow, and what God is trying to do through prophecy. And it's important to ask ourselves some of these questions I put in the notes for this time. How does this emphasis on the marriage relationship relate to our concepts of God and the interpretation of prophecy? You know, all too often we're preoccupied with the beasts and the kings and the kingdoms. No, well, here we're told to go back and look again at the elements of prophecy that include marriage. In the creation of Adam and Eve, what was God revealing? It wasn't just making us, it was to tell us something about the way that we relate to us. And how do we understand God from these concepts of him as the bride that comes to us? How do we wait for him? Are we like those 10 virgins who are waiting for the bridegroom to come? How is all that working out? That's prophetic, isn't it? Jesus talked about the 5 wise and the 5 foolish girls, and that's looking forward to the future when the bridegroom comes, and they all fell asleep. Notice that. But when the call went out, the wise girls were ready and the foolish ones were not. And Jesus, in that very pointed parable, is trying to teach us something about how we relate to time, how we relate to the use of our time. How do we prepare? How are we ready? And do we really want the bridegroom to come? All too often I feel we've got so involved in our little world here that we have almost forgotten about the fact that the one we love the most, or we should love the most, is coming back, and he will be with us, and he will take us to be with him for all eternity. Now that's a prophetic aspect that we can't miss in all this marriage imagery, as the bride of Jesus prepared for her husband to come to see the bridegroom. Don't you think that we should be concentrating on our relationship to him and looking forward to whenever he does choose to return to take us home?